It is the News Blitz with Randy Wang on Talk Radio 790 KABC. We're here every single day from 5 to 6 talking about the local issues that matter to you most and taking your phone calls at 800-222-KABC, 1-800-222-5222, your emails at randykabc@gmail.com, and search for the KABC News Blitz wherever you get your podcasts. There was a very strange announcement today coming from Los Angeles City Hall and Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass. You know, this lady.
If you're feeling down, if you're feeling blue, let's get help for you.
Because I'm sure you remember back in March of this year, the city administrative officer, Matt Szabo, announced that the city of Los Angeles was facing a $1 billion budget deficit. And this was for a whole mess of reasons, including that they had depleted the reserves, so they needed to replenish that in case of an emergency. You had declining revenues, you had declining hotel taxes, you had declining taxes from businesses because many have gone out of business, and hotel revenue is down because tourism was down for a whole bunch of different reasons, including the fires. You also had an tripling of what they expected when it came to liability payouts. And some of those are police related, but a lot of those are also sidewalk related. And the city has just made the decision that it is cheaper to just constantly settle lawsuits about broken sidewalks than to fix the broken sidewalks. That's how broken this city is. And of course, there was also Karen Bass's Inside Safe program that has vastly overspent and underdelivered. So there were many different aspects as to why the city was facing a $1 billion budget surplus. And then a month later, in April, Karen Bass put together her budget proposal for the city council. And that budget proposal showed an $880 million budget deficit, with the unfortunate news that the only way the city was able to balance its books was it would need to lay off 1,600 city workers. Not only that, a good majority of those workers that were going to be laid off were the civilian staff at LAPD, which would greatly hinder the work of LAPD. So that didn't sound very good. Then the city council for a month debated the budget, and we played you some of those hearings, including when Eunice Hernandez incessantly kept asking why the LAPD needs helicopters. She even asked, wait, NYPD doesn't have as many helicopters as we do, to which Jim McDonnell had to explain they also have 3 times the amount of police officers that we have. Might be even more than that at this point. But the city council went through their budget debates, including that whole thing about spending $6 million to fix the lights on the 6th Street Bridge for the Olympics. And it was announced when the city council was done with that budget, we did everything we could, and we've cut that number of layoffs down to 600. And they eliminated this budget deficit, which included $880 million to Karen Bass's failure of a program, Inside Safe.
At the end of the day.
But here we are now in September, and Karen Bass comes out with an announcement flanked by every union leader that represents any employee of the city and says, hey, guess what? We were able to balance the budget and not fire anybody. And now we're on solid financial ground. And I'm left a little confused. Because if there was a way to balance the budget without laying off 1,600 people, then why didn't we start with that? I'm very confused. I'm sure you are as well. And I don't know if I necessarily trust the people that are in charge of the city's finances. But let's hear what Karen Bass had to say. She held a hastily held together press conference today to announce.
And our budget in the city at that time, in April of this year, was going to result in the potential layoff of 1,600 city workers. Well, I am here today to tell you that this has been completely averted.
Everted? Pretty sure it's averted.
Completely averted.
Well, she averted it all right. She everted the 1,600 layoffs. But how? Where did the city magically find $1 billion?
This took a tremendous amount of work on behalf of many people.
I mean, did they find other ways to shrink the budget? Because the budget has ballooned over the last few years, especially since COVID. I'm sure there were places to find waste, but I'm very surprised. Again, this isn't bad news. I don't want anybody losing their job unless they're doing absolutely nothing that's worth anything for the city. Like, I don't know, those violence interrupters that Karen Bass pays because if we don't pay them at least $60,000 a year, they'll go back to a life of crime. How's that working out?
But I will tell you that closing a $1 billion deficit, which
You notice that shit, you can just hear it. I have headphones on, so I can always hear the sound just so perfectly. And you can hear Karen Bass, when she talks, she taps the mic or she bangs the podium.
But I will tell you that closing a $1 billion deficit, which is
So you can hear the bass in the microphone. Why are you doing that?
$1 billion deficit, which is where we were in April, was something that was terrifying to all of us. That $1 billion deficit was because of the economic downturn, the uncertainty.
Well, isn't all of this based on last year's revenue? I don't think we were in economic downturn last year. Maybe I'm wrong. The fires happened in January, and yeah, there was a lot of devastation all over the place because Hollywood pretty much shut down for a month.
The uncertainty in our nation that continues until this day.
But there's still uncertainty. So how did we magically find $1 billion? And notably, this happened without Karen Bass taking that pay cut that she promised. Whatever happened to that?
Liabilities that had escalated in the city.
That also hasn't changed. The liability outlook looks just as bad this year as it did last year. This city gets sued constantly. And while I don't really know what the remedy is when people sue over the police doing their job, sure, there's the occasional police misconduct, but a lot of these cases are a little overblown. And when the city settles, you invite more of it. But that's one category. When the city gets sued relentlessly because of broken infrastructure, at what point do we realize that it makes financial sense to fix the infrastructure? I guess it doesn't. But again, that's not going away. So how did we solve this budget deficit?
All led to us having a $1 billion deficit. So every step of...
Also notice how she didn't say that none of this deficit has to do with how much money she's spending on her program, Inside Safe. How much money it costs to put a homeless person in a motel a month. Because you would think at Motel 6 rates, it wouldn't be that expensive. But at Karen Bass rates, we're paying through the nose to house a tiny portion of the homeless population indefinitely in motels. But don't you worry, we'll always find the money for that program, a program that has been looked at by investigators that have shown that LAHSA was lying about the numbers in Karen Bass's program.
So every step of the way, though, I committed to get to the place where we are today, to do everything that we can to deliver for Angelenos, and we use a variety of solutions. First and foremost, after I turned the budget over to the City Council worked long and hard, and they were able, through a variety of methods, reduce the number of layoffs to 600.
Wasn't one of the ways that they got there is they were going to cancel some of the upcoming police academies, which means that as the LAPD numbers continue to dwindle, that we're not going to meet attrition. But okay, hey, they reduced the number of layoffs. That's great.
Every step of the way, we were laser focused on delivering for Los Angeles, We used creative solutions such as transferring positions to other departments like the port and the airport, and working with general managers to develop other alternatives.
We're not going to fire anybody. We're going to transfer them to other jobs. That doesn't really mean anything to anybody.
That is the work that took place after I signed the budget. Because even signing the budget and celebrating that we had averted 1,000 layoffs was not enough for me.
And by the way, another reason that the city ran into this was Karen Bass decided that one of the better ways that we could retain officers and attract new ones was giving the police a raise. And in the name of equity, every single city department asked for a raise, and they all got them, whether they were warranted or not. And the city could not afford that. But now we can, without having to let anybody go. I'm so confused. Where did the city find $1 billion?
It wasn't good for the city.
But Gavin didn't bail him out. Remember, Karen Bass was going to Sacramento, and she wanted the legislature to send money to Los Angeles to cover this deficit. That didn't happen. Where did we find $1 billion?
It wasn't good for the city, and it wasn't good for delivering city services, which is why we continued to work. I want to specifically thank our city administrative officer, Matt Szabo. Where's Matt Szabo? He'll be joining us.
We could skip the applause.
Matt Szabo, call him, make sure he comes here so he can get his applause because he worked tirelessly. Matt Hale.
If you don't know who he is, he's the city administrator who kind of is like the unelected mayor. He's the one that does all the nuts and bolts. Karen Bass is out there with the speeches, but he's the guy that actually writes the things that she does.
Matt Hale, our deputy mayor. Where is that?
How many deputy mayors does she have, and how much are they making? Did anybody take a pay cut? I just don't understand how we solved $1 billion deficit, and they're not really explaining it.
So this is not about numbers on a spreadsheet. This was always about protecting our skilled city workforce who have trained for years and honed their crafts as building inspectors, truck operators.
Wait. We're starting with building inspectors, including the Office of Building and Safety, that takes forever to respond to a nuisance complaint, like all of the hoarder houses or the squatter houses or the giant Koreatown homeless lot.
As building inspectors, truck operators, mechanics, engineers, city planners, street lighting electricians, crime and intelligence officers, zoo animal keepers, and so many more roles that are responsible for the delivery of vital services to Angelenos.
Wait, we were going to let go of the zookeepers? Who was going to clean the you-know-what?
And I have to tell you that some people said it couldn't be done, but I am so glad to stand here and say that we have proved the naysayers wrong.
But how? And how do we not end up in this same situation next year if the exact same conditions are in front of us? Karen Bass's homeless program continues to be ineffective. Karen Bass's homeless program continues to cost up to $1 billion. Nobody took a pay cut, so the salaries are still as high as before. Revenues are probably going to be down even more so this year than they were last year because of the fires and because of a whole bunch of other things. And liability is not changing. In fact, it's probably only going up. Unless what? They decided to defer some of those lawsuits into the future? I don't know how we're not in a deficit next year because they didn't solve any of the underlying problems, and they still haven't explained how they solved this one without having to lay anybody off. And again, I'm glad they didn't have to lay anybody off. I just don't understand what they did.
We embraced creative solutions and worked aggressively toward our shared goal because that is our mission. That is our charge, to refuse to allow challenges to slow us down. And we will move every ounce of urgency we possess to continue moving Los Angeles forward in a new direction. away from the old failed ways of doing business. So I want to thank our partners that are here today, and I look forward.
Yeah, the unions had a big hand in this because they weren't going to let anybody get fired, and that's what they're supposed to do.
And I look forward to continuing our work together. We know we have challenges ahead, but we also have major opportunities because in less than a year now.
Here we go. This is where I get really irritated with Karen Bass. Everything is about the damn World Cup and the Olympics, which is not that big of a deal.
But we also have major opportunities.
She did it again. You hear it?
But we also have major opportunities because in less than a year now, the World Cup will be here. 8 games will be played in our city, and we are.
All of this hubbub for 8 games of the World Cup, which is great. But one, we're not going to be ready for it. And 2, it's not going to be a massive game changer.
And we are going to do everything we can to make sure that LA is completely ready to welcome the world in a little less than 12 months.
You ever notice that she drops her D's? It's not the World Cup, it's the World Cup. I've just noticed that. Let's get to the Q&A portion of this press conference because I still haven't heard an explanation as to how they were able to solve a $1 billion budget deficit without laying anybody off and nobody taking any pay cuts.
We're going to go to Brittany and then Noah. Mayor Bass, Brittany with NBCLA. I have 2 questions, if that's okay. First, from the beginning, I know you talked about closing that $1 billion deficit. At this point, with all these layoffs, is that...
Oh, yeah, they didn't mic the reporters. Maybe that's where we save the money. We don't buy microphones for the reporters.
That deficit now officially closed, or what is the status on that?
The deficit is officially closed. And again, we are now preparing for next year. We know that economic times continue to be uncertain, but as of right now, we have a balanced budget with no layoffs.
And then my follow-up to that.
I mean, is all of this part of just some fun financial math so when she runs for re-election next year, she can say that we've had balanced budgets and she could say we actually didn't have a deficit when for most of this year we were told we did have a deficit? And then what? She'll solve this problem 2 years from now? I don't know what's going on here, but it seems just a little suspicious.
And then my follow-up to that is, and I was reading a bit of the verbiage that your team handed out, talk about how employees were transferred to different departments. It sounds like there's a shakeup maybe with OT for the police union and then also holidays for some workers.
Wait a second, what? Are we finally getting some details here? Let's hear them.
Let me just tell you the top line, and then I'll ask our Chief Administrative Officer to get into the details. But basically, because we have 3 proprietaries, that their budgets are not impacting the general fund, we were able to transfer people to the airport and to the port of Los Angeles, the largest port in the Western Hemisphere. 40% of the goods of the country.
You're still not answering the question. How did you solve this budget deficit?
Come through the port of Los Angeles and Long Beach, and of course we have a world-class airport. So with that,
nobody would call it that. Nobody calls LAX a world-class airport. It's sometimes listed as the world's worst airport, but still. What was that about police overtime?
Thank you, Mayor. So by way of background, the way the agreements are structured at the beginning of the fiscal year in July, after the council adopted the final budget, there were 614 employees that were subject to layoff. What we did with these agreements is we calculated the amount of savings that would be required to keep the employees on the payroll. And then we divided that up. The employees, the civilian employees, more than about 250 civilian employees at Los Angeles Police Department, we worked with the Police Protective League that represents sworn officers who were not subject to layoff. They made an agreement that would achieve, over the course of the year, overtime savings that would be used to cover the employees at the Los Angeles Police Department.
Okay, finally, somebody answers a question here. But the answer isn't great. So in order to save the jobs of 250 LAPD sworn civilian that are not sworn officers, the police union agreed to cuts in police overtime, which doesn't sound like a big deal until you remember how short-staffed LAPD is, where I think we're at 8,700 officers right now, and there's more retiring every day, and they just cut the academy classes. So you have a very understaffed police department, and now they are not able to use overtime. So one of two things is going to happen. There's going to be less police available to respond to things because now we cannot be giving out overtime. And overtime was something that they used, for instance, to have police on the metro system. Or an emergency happens and we can forget that OT cap. And now the city's going to go into another structural deficit. But that's where we are. I guess we could celebrate because Karen Bass balanced the budget. Kind of. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang on KABC. It is the News Blitz with Randy Wang on Talk Radio 790 KABC. We're here every single day from 5 to 6 talking about the local issues that matter to you most and taking your phone calls at 800-222-KABC. 1-800-222-5222. Your emails at randykabc@gmail.com. And search for the KABC News Blitz wherever you get your podcasts. Something you rarely hear out of Sacramento when it comes to laws that are getting passed and bills that are getting signed is a bill that is aimed to lower taxes. Just not something you usually hear. But it did happen, and it happened on a very specific tax. See, quite a few years ago now, the state of California voted to legalize recreational marijuana. Which is funny always to me because, like, pot got legalized a year after I stopped doing it. I had one of those medical cards, but we'll get into that. But when California voted to legalize marijuana, they set up a regulatory framework that people could legally operate businesses, state legally, still federally illegally. So there's always been the issue of how exactly banking is going to work with this, which is why a lot of these businesses operate in all cash and they are prone to robbery. Now, what happened was, not only did we create this regulatory framework, but we sold the idea of the reason that we want to have pot legal in the state of California is because all the money that we tax from it, we can use to fund a whole bunch of different things. And we can even fund substance abuse programs with it. Well, the problem with California's regulatory environment for a market that it just created was the taxes and fees and everything associated with doing business in this state as a cannabis dealer, as a legal cannabis store. Well, it became so expensive that it was cheaper to buy it illegally. Because one of the things, and it's interesting, one of the big arguments that's always been made, and I probably was one that made this argument in the past as well. Well, you wipe out the black market if you legalize it. Figures that it makes sense. If you have a legal and safe and regulated way to get pot, and that's your thing, and, you know, if that's your thing, good for you. It's not my thing anymore. But if you have that legal market, well, look at you. Now there's no reason to be bringing this stuff in from Mexico or illegally growing it or buying it from the dealer on the street or going up on Craigslist and seeing who has something to sell for 420 roses. Oh, I remember those days. You know, the first time I ever bought weed was before I even knew what I was doing. I was working in Burbank by myself, and I was trolling Craigslist because that's what people did in 2005 or I think this is right before I got into radio, 2006. And I wanted to buy some pot. I didn't have any friends that were into it. I didn't really have that many friends. This is pre-radio. And I found someone on Craigslist that was using secret codes. And I was like, hey, I would like to buy some stuff. And he said, great, I've got some kush for you. I said, no, I don't want kush. I want weed. I had no idea what I was doing. How badly did I not know what I was doing? Well, whatever he had sold me, I was trying to wrap up into tissue paper and light that because I did not understand what rolling papers were. It was a colossal failure, and I did not end up able to smoke that pot. And then I pretty much forgot all about it until I got into radio. Well, you know what happened. One day you're sitting in a parking garage and Arsenio Hall hands you a one-hitter of weed. And at the time you're like, oh, I can't get high because I don't know how to inhale, but you can't not inhale with a one-hitter. And there it was, 10 years of pot smoking. But anyway, California's regulatory environment made it very, very expensive to buy weed the right way. At the same time, we didn't really do anything to go after the illegal market in a real way. Where it was cheaper to operate illegally and deal with the fines and the occasional raids, you're still making more money. It's also a difficult system when people can just grow this stuff themselves. Believe you me, I've had plenty of friends in the past that have done that. Well, a lot of pot store owners were making their case to local city councils and to the state legislature that we cannot afford this. We are losing our livelihoods. We're not making any money. Everyone's going to the illegal market, and the taxes cannot go up. So, for the first time in what feels like forever, Sacramento listened, and the taxes for pot might actually be going down. For more, here's CBS Sacramento.
A big win for California's cannabis industry. Here's what we mean. Governor Newsom just signed a bill that cancels a planned 25% tax hike on legal pot.
Now, critics warn without that extra revenue, key state programs could suffer.
Oh, boy. I can't wait to find out what's being funded by the pot tax.
Dive into this. CBS 13's Brady Halbach in studio with what it means for growers and state programs, Brady.
Yeah, that's right, guys. This bill, now signed into law, will reduce the planned 25% tax hike to just 15% for the cannabis industry through 2028. Now, the goal is to...
Wait, so it's only a reduction in taxes for the next 2.5 years? I guess it's something. Maybe if it shows that it's working. Look, you have to make it, if you're not going to heavily enforce the illegal pot market, then you've got to make the legal market competitive, because I would imagine most people would rather go to the regulated stores. I've only been into one once, and it was not to buy anything for me because, again, I haven't touched weed since 2017. But one of my dogs... my old batch of dogs, one of them was having a lot of pain issues. So I got her some tinctures for weed for her pain. That was pretty cool. But, it's a completely different world than when I was into it, because it is, there's regulations and there's testing. And I'm sure people would much prefer that, especially when who knows what they're putting into the stuff that's not regulated. Who knows what they're putting on to enhance it? But I guess some people, they don't care.
Goal.
Ultimately, cost is going to determine where your dollars go if this is your thing, right?
Goal is to help licensed cannabis growers and sellers survive so they can better compete with the illegal market. Supporters say that this will help protect jobs.
It always felt like a missed opportunity, right? Like, you have legalized pot in California. Shouldn't you have all the effort possible with the Attorney General's office and local law enforcement it's fairly obvious where this stuff is being grown, and if you don't have a license, confiscate it, burn it, what have you. But maybe it's so prevalent that, these things pop up so quickly. And by the way, it also has a massive drain on our water resources, which, as last I checked, were kind of tight in California. But it always seemed to me, why is this so hard to deal with? But at least I learned that just because you legalize it doesn't necessarily mean that everything's going to be okay. We did not kill the illegal market. In fact, some studies have shown that it's bigger than ever, which is wild to think about. Well, we'll hear more about this tax decrease when it comes to legal pot in California next. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang on KABC. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang on KABC. Before we get back to this story of California temporary lowering pot taxes, let's go to Roy in downtown. Roy, hello.
Hello, Randy. Yes. Randy, I think your vaunted city council could do the residents of Los Angeles a great service by renaming MacArthur Park.
And what should we rename it to?
Let's go with Joe Biden Park or Joe Biden / Mayor Karen Bass Park, because the new crew down there, I'm very familiar with the park, are precisely the people that Joe Biden's administration has let into this country. You see groups of obvious drug users huddled together. You see the bent over people on fentanyl. You see people standing in the middle of the street, unable to move, and just standing there in very slow motion. And it has changed. It has changed. And these are Joe Biden's boys down there in what should be called Joe Biden Park. It's that simple.
Well, there you go. Joe Biden Memorial Park, Karen Bass Memorial Park. It does memorialize certain policies. Thanks so much for the call, Roy. Appreciate it. All right, let's hear more about this pot tax.
Supporters say that this will help protect jobs and keep smaller pot shops open, while also ensuring that customers have access to safe and regulated products. At the same time, the state says that it is cracking down on illegal growers with a special task force already destroying nearly $900 million worth of illegal cannabis since 2022.
That doesn't sound like that much.
But critics say that the tax cut will strip 10% of the original funding for key programs that depend on cannabis revenue. Dr. Lynn Silver with the Public Health Institute says it'll slash money for child care, youth substance abuse prevention, and environmental programs. It also comes at a time where she says federal funding is at an all-time low.
Oh no, nonprofits are going to get less money for programs that don't do anything. So sad.
Biggest single use of these taxes is to fund child care slots for foster kids, emergency child care, and low-income families. So all of those activities are going to be significantly reduced by this.
But if more people are buying the legal product because the taxes are now less and it costs the same as the illegal product, doesn't that mean the revenue would go up? Maybe? No?
California's cannabis market helps fund schools and public programs. State leaders believe that this tax cut will help the cannabis industry continue to thrive, so that money will continue to fund some of those programs, guys.
Yeah. Well, there's the latest. We'll follow that, but it looks like, at least temporarily, California's going to reduce taxes on legal pot. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang on KABC. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang on KABC. You know, occasionally I do get the question at randykabc@gmail.com, especially whenever I talk about, marijuana in the news, as to why did I quit? Because if you knew me between 2007 and 2017, while I wasn't the biggest stoner in the world, I had plenty of friends that were. I was smoking constantly. I had myself convinced that it was great for sleeping, except I stayed up till 3 every night and then drove to Jack in the Box and ate a massive amount of drive-through with a Diet Coke and then just kind of passed out in a food coma. But yes, I was under the impression it helped me sleep until I met my wife, and she explained to me how stupid that was because of said behavior. But, I was one of those enhancement smokers. Oh, this is going to enhance everything that I'm doing. And I'll tell you, here we are. I haven't touched the stuff in nearly a decade, and I remember my 30s a lot better than I remember my 20s. And I don't mean that they were better. I remember them better. There's a lot of my 20s that I kind of remember, but it's kind of all in a fog. I will say this as well. For me, at least personally, again, if you enjoy it, great. When I turned 30, it turned on me. I started getting really anxious every time I smoked. And that was starting to be a real problem for me, to the point where, because I believed so hard that it was good for me and it was a crutch, even though, I was the worst at coughing, I'm still the worst at smoking, and I would cough up blood sometimes. I was so convinced it's good for me that it took me like 6 months to admit it was bad for me. But still, it was the simplest thing that inspired the change. We moved. We moved from a house in Burbank, which I still regret to this day, not the house, but living in Burbank, to a townhouse in Reseda on Sherman Way. And there wasn't really a backyard. There's a front porch, but it's facing Sherman Way. So I was like, I don't really feel comfortable just smoking out here in the middle of the street. So I just stopped. And I was irritable for about 3 weeks. And then something really interesting happened. I'm walking down the halls of the radio station. I was doing the morning show at the time. And Debbie, who worked in sales then, now she's our general sales manager, she stops me in the hallway and she says, I don't know what's happened with you lately, but you sure do sound a whole lot smarter. And, well, I'm a sucker for compliments. And I was like, well, if I sound smarter, that's only going to help me in this business. So I was like, okay, I think I'm done. And there you go. It's been 8 years. I will say, I don't necessarily 100% believe that it completely robs you of your ambition. That being said, I am much more ambitious now when I don't do it. But you know what? If you work your butt off and you need that to take the edge off and drinking's not your thing, do whatever you want, as long as it's not a problem for you. Thank you all so much for listening. Always appreciate you spending an hour with me every day from 5 to 6. It's the News Blitz with Randy Wang on Talk Radio 790 KABC.